All right, we're recording now. So again, thank you for joining us for this 1 hour member series, we call it. And but you don't have to be a member to be part of it, but we encourage you to become a member. How about that? These are 1 hour meetings. They're tight, but we try to get a lot of things started. And we hope that you can continue these conversations after these meetings through the NAPE affinity group as it relates to this particular topic. So I'm going to advance the slide. I want to share with you a little bit about what these meetings are about and what NAPE is about in terms of its membership and what it really means. I refer to it as M to M, member to member connections. Our member engagement goals is to support our members through what I call the 3 keys: discovery, connection, and taking action. And what it is, it's an opportunity to learn and implement and innovate. I didn't mean to go so quickly, sorry. Innovate in a way that improves our day-to-day work and has the potential to positively impact our peers and our partners in the field. And so you can see on the right side of the screen what discover, connect, and take action mean. But what they look like is NAPE PD as discover, membership and membership committees and affinity groups are the connecting part, including these meetings. And take action are the kinds of things that you take back with you and you implement in your institution, in your classrooms, with your partners and peers out in the field, and through any advocacy or public policy related work that you do too. So for us, what member engagement looks like comes in many different forms. And these are opportunities for you to collaborate and build on the work that we do through our NAPE curriculum and other kinds of activities that we do through NAPE. And they could come in the form of 1 hour engagement, such as these web-based meetings, which are, as I mentioned earlier, interactive. They're designed for you to be able to connect. It's not just a data dump, but it's an opportunity for sharing of promising practices and connecting with one another. We also have what we call 1 day plus opportunities. And those are things like becoming involved in the planning committee for the NAPE Summit and participating in the NAPE Summit, which was recently held in April in Washington, D.C., and will be held next year in March. And then we have what are called 6-month plus, which are long-term projects. And those are the kinds of activities and actions that you can become connected to and involved in through NAPE committees. And there are a range of NAPE committees. And certainly if you go to our NAPE page, our membership page on the NAPE website, you can learn more about committees and how you can join them. Ultimately, the way the committees are structured are as a tool for just doing the work. They're challenge focused, they're cross-functional, meaning they're members of the NAPE Executive Committee working hand in hand with NAPE members, whether they're affiliates or state members or individuals who are welcome to join open committees. And they're time-bound, meaning the committees work together over what usually is the school year, 9 months from October to June, toward a meaningful outcome that's set when the committee initially meets. So there are certain goals that are set, and they're time-bound and outcome-driven. NAPE members collaborate with staff like myself, Associate Director for Membership and Partnership, with providing the scaffolding for these meetings. And we use Google Docs as that scaffolding so that there is open sharing of notes and other materials through Google Docs. So we're kind of getting near that time of the year where we begin renewal. It's the closing of this current fiscal year, and our fiscal year begins July 1st. And before I kind of turn things over to the meeting, I want each and every one of you to consider renewing your NAPE membership or joining NAPE if this is your first experience with us. So now we're going to talk about what brings us here. And we start out these meetings with a reflection question, which I'm asking if you can take a minute to reflect on this question. What resonates with you about this particular topic, supporting English language learners in CTE? And if you can introduce yourself through the chat, your name and your affiliation, where you're from, and any reflection thought that you would like to share. And I just want to say, let's take another minute, a minute or two for you to reflect and to share your reflections, if you have any, in the chat. So please take a moment to do that. All right. Some great things here. And Brittany, I did get your message and I will take care of that in just a second. All right, so we're going to move on now. Welcome to everybody. We got Iowa, we got Idaho, we have some folks I know I see from New Mexico. Hello, New Mexico contingent. Going to be reaching out to you, John and Herman. All right. Please continue sharing. Hi, Audrey. We got Texas here. All right, so our agendas are pretty straight. They're pretty straight for this member series, and we'll continue doing it. I'm going to pass things over to our CEO, Brittany Brady, who is the host of our fireside chats, and she will provide an introduction to our guest, and we'll have our panel talk, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to share what your experiences has been, or any Q&A, or anything else that you would like to share on this call before we wrap things up. So without further ado, drum roll, please. Brittany Brady.
Thank you so much, Gregory. And it's so great to see so many familiar faces for a chat that is very timely, especially given what so many folks have said here in the chat. So without further ado, I am honored and elated to introduce you all to Heather Salaz. If you attended our summit, you might have had the privilege of participating in one of her sessions. She was one of our presenters through a workshop. And Heather brings more than 20 years of experience to the E3 Alliance team. She's the director of Strong Foundations. They're in Central Texas. Up here from North Texas, we're always happy to be having that Texas connection, and I see a lot of Texans in the chat. And her seasoned career in public education spans from Central Texas school districts to regional and state level administration, where she served at the Texas Education Agency and Education Service Center Region 13 and various statewide initiatives focused on transforming systems to ensure equity and excellence for students. Within their Pathways of Promise initiative at E3, Heather was able to focus on equitable math pathways, aligned with students' college and career aspirations, as well as their Attendance Matters, ACE Task Force, and the English Learners Collaborative. She holds a master's degree in elementary education with a focus on second language acquisition from Texas State University and a principal certificate from Region 13. Heather is the perfect person to talk about this work, and we're really excited to have her. And before she speaks, I have to share a personal gratitude to Heather because she is just really a wonderful human and also someone really centered in this work, especially for students that are often overlooked and under-supported, like English language learners. And so I will go ahead and pass it over to Heather, who will begin our time with a little bit of data and intention around E3's work in this arena.
Please, thank you, Brittany. I was not expecting that full introduction. You're going to make me cry. Thank you all so much for having me here. I'm very excited to kind of share some of the data and the work that we're doing here in Central Texas. I'm going to try to change my screen real quick. I'm not looking at a different screen. All right. So again, thank you for having me. I'm going to share a little bit about what E3 is and what we're doing, and then a little bit around the work that we're doing to start. We kind of started some work focused on emergent bilinguals. So I'll share how we are starting that work and a few data pieces before we talk through Brittany, the conversation with Brittany. But feel free as I'm going through to interrupt me or ask questions as I'm going through slides. I really value the questions and feedback we get. We have a couple of folks also, I think, on the call from E3, and they're with our research and data team. So if we have some real specific questions, they're here to help out as well. But what I wanted to start with is Brittany mentioned the Pathways of Promise initiative that we've been working on at E3, and that is the math pathways work that we were doing, focused in on looking at 8th grade algebra rates. So the work started around 7 or 8 years ago, and NAPE was a part of the work from almost the get-go. And the reason why we wanted to focus on this was we saw inequities in access to 8th grade algebra. So when we ran the data and looked at students that were accessing 8th grade algebra based on their 5th grade state standardized test score, it was inequitable based on race and ethnicity and income level. So we focused in by working with districts in the area and formed a steering committee to look at promising practices to change the outcomes for students. So don't want to go too into it. It was 8 years of work, and I will just say the result of that work has led to state legislation passing, which is not easy to do in this state. So we were really excited in our last legislative session to pass SB 2124, which is requiring all districts in the state to automatically place students that are in the top 2 quintiles of 5th grade STAR, which is our state test. They'll automatically be placed into advanced math pathways. So we're real excited about that. And from the successes of that, we are trying to launch a new initiative. And this one is focusing on emergent bilingual students' access. And not just to CTE, although we do talk about CTE, but to also any type of advanced coursework. So AP, dual credit, CTE, and IB. So we really want to narrow down what's happening with this specific group of students. So I'll pause there for any questions before I start sharing some of our data that we are using to lead this work. All right, I'm going to share screen now. Is everyone able to see my screen? All right. So I mentioned the math pipeline. So we looked at the math pipeline for students, and we pulled this data specifically with the districts that are participating in our steering committee. We have a new steering committee focused on emergent bilinguals. We pulled some data and shared this with them. This was a piece that stood out a lot. So we wanted to kind of highlight this for you today to see why we're focusing on this work. And what this is sharing is the math pipeline after a student graduates high school. So we look at non-emergent bilingual and emergent bilingual. You can see the 2 different lines. And these are students that completed a college-lined math course. So when we look at that, 99% of the students that are completing a college-lined math course are graduating, okay? So emergent bilingual, non-emergent bilingual, they're graduating. So we know graduation rates are high for these students. But what we noticed that the steering committee immediately recognized was this gap of enrolling in higher ed. So you can see from the 99% of students that graduated, 70% of non-emergent bilingual students went on to enroll in higher ed, but only 41% of emergent bilingual students did. So this was a huge gap that we immediately identified. Of course, we brought this to the steering committee, and these are the districts doing the work, and they immediately wanted to dig into that a little bit. So this kind of led us to pause and really think through what's happening between the graduation and the enrollment. I also want to clarify that what we consider enrollment in higher ed is not just a 4-year institution. We are considering a community college, any institute of higher ed or credential, any type of post-secondary is what we're really looking at for higher ed. When you go a little bit forward into this longitudinal, you look at 2018, you can see of the 41% of students that enrolled that were emergent bilingual, 39% persisted, and then around 30% completed. So persistence completion rates once they're in seems to be pretty tracking with non-emergent bilinguals, but it's that access point of getting students to enroll. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions about this before I kind of dig in a little bit more. All right. Wanted to look at graduation rates based on this as well, see what's happening here. And we knew off the bat that emergent bilingual students had a lower graduation rate. So again, the orange line is our Central Texas, the solid line, emergent bilingual, and the gray line shows our non-emergent bilingual in Texas. I think I said that wrong. The dotted line is the emergent bilingual, and then Texas is the gray line. I'm going to pause there and let y'all look at that. So again, identifying this area of need around graduation rates. And so I know that we're here to talk about CTE, and we do not have answers exactly on how to engage students, but we are focusing in on this work. And that's why Brittany wanted me to talk today, is what we're doing. So we're still digging into what's happening with these students and what's going on. What I did want to share is what we found when we started pulling the dual credit engagement, because we also know dual credit is a huge indicator of students enrolling into post-secondary. So in 2013, 95% of EBs in high school were taking no dual credit. Now we've raised that to only 8 or lowered that to only 89%, but that's still only 11% of our emergent bilingual students taking any dual credit in high school. We need work to do like across the board, but we can specifically see it for emergent bilingual students in this graph. I'm just curious in the chat too, is this similar to what you're seeing? I know that we've got folks from across the country here. Is this similar data to what you're seeing in your district or state or whatever level you're at? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that. I'll keep looking at chat to see. I'm curious how this resonates and correlates to your own personal experience. All right, so as we dig into this work, we've convened with our Emergent Bilingual Steering Committee, which is consisting of CTE directors of districts, as well as advanced academics and bilingual directors and coordinators from school districts. So we are all convening to start the conversation around what strategies we need to focus on to support emergent bilingual students. E3 Alliance is cradle to career. We focus on everything. So we are looking all the way back into elementary school to see what is predicting the success of these students and any barriers that we might find as well. I'm going to share the last slide about CTE. And this kind of shares a little bit around what the engagement in CTE looks. And it's pretty similar that we're finding right now between emergent bilingual and non-emergent bilingual students. We're still digging into the different types and clusters, and we're trying to get feedback from our committee members on what areas we should specifically be looking at. But I wanted to share this. We do have higher rates of 20% emergent bilinguals having 0 to 2 CTE semesters, but you can see they're kind of tracking similarly. We want to increase our rates across, but we're still kind of digging into what this looks like for our EB students. Are there any questions? Right. So this is a new piece of data that I was very excited to gather too, because we wanted to see what this looks like afterwards, right? What is the 6-year outcome for the class of 2016? So we can really see that the impact of any post-secondary is a lot higher for EB students. So on the left hand, you have students that had any type of post-secondary education, whether they were employed or unemployed or other, and that could be gig economy, but we don't have record of employment. And we have, again, you can see the non-emergent bilinguals at 80% versus 77% with any post-secondary. If you look over with no post-secondary, only 33% of emergent bilingual students have a job. That's 6 years after secondary. So I'm going to stop sharing there and kind of open it up. And I know, Brittany, you're going to guide us through a little bit of a fireside chat, ask some questions, but I just wanted to leave it with the idea that this is work in progress. We would love to come back, and we are meeting with our steering committee actually tomorrow to refine our research questions as we move forward. The first year of this work has really been to dig deep and gather, because people do not know the answers to these questions yet. So we're really trying to gather some information and move forward. So we hope to have some promising practices coming out over the next couple of years while we do this work. The grant that we have is a 3-year cycle, so we'll be working for a while on this.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I think that folks are just taking in those data points, because as you mentioned, you all are at the inception of your work, and quite a few folks in the chat are talking about how this is at the intersection of some of their other work, but not necessarily the sole focus. And so I think I'm grateful that you came to share with us today, especially because it's so important for us to think intentionally. Like those, that last slide you just shared just emphasizes time and again the importance of a post-secondary credential. 33% is really, really sobering. And so I hope folks took a moment to take that in. I want to get us started with our chat. And as always, folks, as you hear things that resonate with you, as you're curious about things, please do type into the chat. We're always monitoring it, and I can pull it into our conversation. So please, there's no need to be shy. We're all friends here. I noticed as you presented, you use the term emerging bilingual instead of English language learners when discussing this very important and often overlooked population. Can you share more about that intentional language choice?
Yeah, definitely. So the state actually has adopted that term. So the state of Texas has changed in Texas Education Code the term from English language learner to emergent bilingual. And the rationale behind is really focusing in on these students becoming bilingual. In Central Texas, I mean, around 90% of emergent bilingual students we're talking about are Spanish speaking. So that's what we're focusing on. And we really want to provide opportunities for those students to become literate in both languages. So the idea of being emergent bilingual is being bilingual, biliterate, bicultural. And that's the goal of dual language programs starting in elementary school. And that's the focus of most of our programs here in Central Texas. I think that that's kind of a push across the country to provide for students, specifically Spanish-speaking students. But we are lucky that our state is very supportive of progressive policies around emergent bilingualism, and they're supporting dual language programs at the elementary level. Some districts have been able to take those dual language programs up to middle school and all the way into high school. So we're excited to see what that brings, because we need a bilingual workforce too. So that's something we're talking about. But really raising that level of language and asset base, talking about emergent bilingual students.
Thank you. And I mean, it does have an assets-based framing, right? It doesn't just make English at the center, even though many of us are English speakers, even on this call. Emergent bilingual still, to me, honors their native language or the tongue that they're most familiar with. And I think that that's a really nice way to remind folks that you are evolving to acquire an additional language, but that doesn't mean that you have to put your language of origin behind you, which I really think is really a thoughtful way to center folks. And then I know Cassie earlier in the chat put that she thinks that supporting English language learners should continue past K-12. And Heather, I know you and I had a brief conversation about that. So much of the focus is on elementary school. Wanted to know if you wanted to weigh in a little bit about that, especially as you guys are exploring this work, if that's going to be an area of focus, even if it's just middle grade.
Absolutely. So my background is as a ESL bilingual teacher in elementary school. So what we've seen happen is that there's a strong program and support for students that are emergent bilinguals in elementary. And depending on where they go, it kind of drops off in middle school. And this actually also correlates to the data that we see as far as reclassification, because we are terming these students emergent bilingual. We want them to become bilingual, fluent in both languages. But what happens often is that students reclassify before they go to middle school. And if they don't reclassify before they go to middle school, they become long-term English learners. So that's a new group of students that we're kind of looking at to see, because a lot of students don't reclassify if they don't do it before middle school. What middle school support systems look like are varied. It's usually ESL, it's an ESL certified teacher in the classroom. Not every teacher is ESL certified. For students that are potentially newcomers or recent immigrants, it's hit or miss what type of support students get. So that's a huge part of the focus, is looking at programs. We know that students are pretty successful in elementary in these dual language programs, but then something happens when they leave. So we're trying to dig into that. That's a big part of what we're asking, because this leads to, whatever happens in secondary, their access to any type of advanced courses and CTE as well.
Right. I'm excited to learn what you all learn as you all explore that answer. I'm going to move us forward because I know you guys are at the beginning of your work. And so I want to know if you have any advice to offer the others that are joining us in this meeting in terms of supporting these learners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing I know about the organization I work in, we focus on collective impact. So nothing can be done with research alone, and the research cannot be done without practitioner perspective and student and family voice. So, we're in the early phase, and a lot of that is about building the relationships and creating the sense of urgency, though. That has not been hard, because the people that we presented this data to were already compelled and pretty invested in these students. So we have actually more engagement than we expected to have, and we're very excited about that. But we are still kind of refining the work and trying to organize it. But the relationships and trust building, we created a success statement as a group. We're really focused on that vision. And eventually, I think we'd like to turn this into some metrics that we'd like to hold ourselves accountable to. But right now, we're really focused on what are the research questions, what are we going to be looking for, because we want to highlight what districts are doing well, and then go to those districts and see what we can replicate and what other districts can learn from them. So that's part of the steering committee. But I would just say collaboration is key, relationships are key, and then kind of that shared vision and success statement has been helpful.
And also co-creating that shared vision and success statement, to your point, right? Like,
Yes.
if we are supporting a community, if we're supporting learners, they are part of this process to make sure that what we're building has them at the core and at the center, which I love. And I love that that is part of E3's approach to this work. And I think that's what makes it so sustainable. So thank you for sharing that. It's always important for folks to be reminded. NAPE is constantly saying student voice, community voice, community voice. So the more folks that are reminding us of that, the better. I want to take a moment to uplift a question in the chat from Gregory. How best can institutions and instructors actively engage emerging bilingual students and their families to solicit feedback and input on their experiences in CTE and identify areas for improvement? So again, that student learner voice, how are we being informed by that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have an answer specifically, but we're asking that same question, Richard or Gregory. And I wanted to just say that one thing that I share the data. These are data pieces, but we are really trying to get the qualitative components of this. So what is the human experience going through this, and what does that feel like, look like? We are trying to support our districts to really dig into gathering student and family voice through focus groups. We're going to be doing some training around empathy interviews too, so we can get that voice through our parents, our students, our teachers too. I mean, I think we don't necessarily include teacher voice in this enough. That's why we wanted to bring teachers into the steering committee, and also counselors. Counselor is a very important part of this process. So that's one thing I've realized, is it's really important to bring them to the table and have those conversations. But I do think, we we talk a lot about what is the experience, but we just need to ask too. I think students want to share what their experience is. I have a junior at home. He wants to share a lot of what his experience is so far going through high school. So I think people are hungry to share their voice. So just asking and finding a way to get that data too.
And to authentically engage it, right? Like most learners want to share, but they're not going to share openly if they've shared before and you haven't moved forward on it. So a lot of what we want to remind folks is when you've invited that voice, what have you done with it if you're not getting that voice anymore, right? There's a reason people might not have seen you move on what they expressed as areas of discontent.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really thank you, Diana, for putting in the chat. I'm curious about some of these items as well. She put, I wonder if your findings will uncover any of the above. Classes occupy periods when CTE classes could be taken and/or lack of awareness and promotion of CTE program to all emerging bilingual students. And then 3, emerging bilingual students not seeing friends or peers they relate to taking CTE classes. And I think, Diana, all of the above potentially, especially when we think about the master scheduling and of folks thinking about maybe support services for emerging bilingual students or whatever the case may be. I've also seen CTE be leveraged as a real way to engage emerging bilingual students because of the nature of some of the content is similar to math for emerging bilingual students. And that is something that you're able to kind of do that is a language builder instead of language required. But I will, of course, defer to our speaker. But that comment got me excited, Diana. So thank you for weighing in.
No, Brittany, I mean, ditto on everything you said. And I think we're doing another stream of work that I'm working with on attendance. Attendance. And we're really seeing chronic absence is massive right now. And, we're finding in Central Texas, our low-income students are really struggling to get to class and the attendance rates are low. So I think that this is relevant to that. We're trying to dig into the questions of like, when is this being offered? Is it at the same time when students might have to leave to work? We know a lot of our students are working part-time jobs. Austin has become a very expensive city to live. So, that is a question that we're asking. So that's the type of thing that we'll be asking our districts to bring. Like, have you looked at your master schedule? How is it being accessed for students? What is the process for them getting into? How do they know about it? What's the representation? Representation matters, right? Who are the teachers? How are the teachers treating these students? I mean, I don't have to say it. Y'all know NAPE is amazing at raising the culture of expectations in teachers through, mindset training. So we really look at that. And we're going to be doing a NAPE mindset training in the summer with groups from the steering committee, but we've also opened it up to anybody that's working with emerging bilingual students. So we're excited to see what results from that. But those are excellent questions that we're also curious about.
Yeah, and your answer just now reminded me, Melissa earlier put in the chat when looking at your post-secondary data, if 6 years out is due to folks not working in order to raise a family, right? There's so many elements of degree attainment and certification, et cetera, that require you to step away from other responsibilities, whether it is to make money or to raise a family or whatever the case may be. And so we can never distinguish educational attainment from economic circumstances. There's a reason why we see that consistently in lower income populations. It's that additional need that they are shouldering that other students don't necessarily have to. And I think it's especially prominent in emerging bilingual students, especially those that are newer to our economies. I know, Heather, when you and I spoke before, we were talking about how in middle and high school, a lot of our newer newcomers to our economies are unable to have emerging bilingual services. And so then we have people that will be excellent additions to our workforce and being able to access our education systems that are not receiving all of the services that they need because the emerging bilingual services kind of trickle off. And so I think all of these conversations are connected, and I'm sure that as you all explore further, you'll really get to some really cool data. So I'm excited.
Brittany, the one thing I would add to that question around what classes they can be taken if they have to take the ESL course, right? That was one thing that we really wanted to look at because that whole middle school, if they don't reclassify before middle school, it's almost impossible for them to by high school. So that was a guiding question to launch some of this work as well, because we knew that students that were carrying that ESL label into middle and high school were going to be required to keep taking the ESL course. So we have had a little shift in reclassification criteria at the state level. So it used to be they had to get a combined score of advanced high on like all of these different components of a language test, but now they've changed it so it's a composite score. We're going to probably see a lot more students reclassify earlier, and hopefully we'll see a shift in that. But that's something that we definitely wanted to know, because I mean, if a student is just being required to stay in ESL, there's no specific reason or guidance for them to reclassify. It's not helping them. It's limiting their ability to take other classes, literally.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about barriers, like there's not one that's much bigger than that. Thank you, Gregory, for kicking it off. And I want to make sure that all in the audience know we're going to go ahead and transition to our Q&A. Heather is indeed an expert, and we're happy to, any questions we don't have the answer to kind of source them around our membership and see if we can come up with an answer. And so thank you, Gregory, for getting us started with how can folks leverage data and the research to advocate for evidence-based interventions and resources that support academic development and linguistic development of emerging bilingual students? What strategies can be used to build partnerships and coalitions with community leaders and workforce partners? And this is the perfect question for you, Heather, because this is like literally what y'all do.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that first part. I really like that you talked about support academic and linguistic development of EB students, because I think that's what happens sometimes is the linguistic part gets left off. And I mean, they're tied together, and it's tied to culture and it's their identity. So we cannot remove the linguistic development there. So I think, what we're doing right now is what you're getting at here is leveraging the data and research to advocate. So we're going to pull our districts together and look at this. This is what we've been doing. But the next steps are them providing us with research questions. And then our research team will be kind of digging into more data. But we're also going to be using the districts as a resource to look into data. So kind of using this like action research, right? So we've identified lots of problems, and we're going to be digging into what are the root causes of some of those with support from the district. So they'll be kind of guiding their own work. I think anytime a practitioner can do the research themselves is the most impactful. So that's how we're approaching it. We have quite a few interventions and resources that we know of and that people say are being implemented in secondary and middle and high school. But I think what this is going to actually have us pause to do and reflect on is, are they really being implemented the way we want them to be? If we know they're successful, then where is the barrier? What is happening? I have my own ideas around what I experienced as an educator, but we're going to really dig into their data at their middle school and high school level to see, are these interventions and resources being utilized? And if they are, what is the hiccup there? And then the strategies used to build partnerships and coalitions with community leaders and workforce partners. We have recently reached out to other nonprofits in the area that work with the emergent bilingual populations in different capacities, and they are actually part of the steering committee as well. The steering committee is meant to be part of the entire community. We're still working to get workforce in there, but I think that's the next step. We wanted to pull in nonprofit after we got our districts kind of situated, and then our next steps will be to reach out to the workforce partners and pull them in as well, because we also want to highlight the need for bilingual workforce, right? Because that's going to create that asset mindset that we really, really need in secondary education. I hope that got to those two questions.
I think it did. And feel free to type it in the chat or to come off mute. I know we do not have an actually shy group, so please don't be shy today. Especially those scholars, all of you dissertation PhD students, I know you all always have questions, so please do bring them forward. We're happy to answer. And then as we're awaiting questions, I do want to have one visionary question, if you will, Heather, which is, at the culmination of this work, when we're looking at the end of the 3-year grant period, what do you hope will be true?
Mhm. I mean, I have, my pipe dream, but it's not going to happen in 3 years. I think
Give me both. Give
ideally
me both.
within, well, I mean, what happened with the math work was pretty inspiring to see that, this could actually, some type of work that we started in Central Texas could lead to, legislative change. But within 3 years, I think our big goal is to start really uncovering what works. Like, what do we know works? Because I think that's what the issue is right now, is not sure. I don't think people have been paying attention enough to know what's working for emergent bilingual students. So really kind of highlighting what's working, but also getting the experience from students and families to know. So I think we have to know that to know what's working. But I think if we can gather that data of student family experience and use it to determine promising practices, that's the goal.
Yeah, I love that. Especially when you think about holistic support, right? Gleaning all of those different areas of emphasis and kind of creating a promising practice guide, if you will, of the different things that are working in different contexts, because emerging bilingual students have so many different experiences across our ecosystem. Some are in areas like Central Texas, where there's a concentration of folks that have that lived experience. And then other people go places where there are very, very few people with that lived experience. And so I would imagine that there are some things that are transferable and some things that are niche that need to be developed by communities within communities. And so I'm excited to see how that kind of flows forth. I see we have a question from our NAPE Education Foundation Board President, Dr. Lou Ann Hargrave. Lou, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure do. Is there an indicator when you do your collection that shows for employment that they have a working? What about the ones that are working for cash, not for any collective way of finding out if they're employed or not?
I know that Rodrigo is on this call, I believe, and he's our research and data person. But what I believe is that they are in the other category, so we would not be able to see that. And yes, I agree. That's probably a huge part, a huge group of folks that are working in that either gig industry or for cash. So there's not a way for us to track that right now, but it's something that we can ask our community to be looking at too. That's why we need to pull in some of the workforce as well.
The other thing I would wonder about, it used to, there would be some kind of a stigma for people to attend CTE work. Parents had a better ambitions for their children, and they didn't see CTE as one of that met their aspirations. Do you think that might be something measurable you're measuring, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that, our EB students were kind of close to being on par with the non-EB students in CTE. So I think we are doing some things right there. I think messaging probably is going well in Central Texas. I know that, we've started a lot of ECHS P-Tech programs in Austin ISD, and I've seen the way it's been communicated out, and I believe that there's been some successes there. So, but I would be curious to know if some districts are experiencing that. And, the majority of our students that we're talking about are Spanish speaking, but we have pockets of students that are coming from other parts of the world. And I'd be curious to see if we find any difference between those, communities and cultures as far as perspectives on CTE. So I think that's a great question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. And then we have a question in the chat from Melissa Thomas, and I've observed this as well, Melissa. Several emerging bilingual students come into our school systems not knowing how to read their own language, which makes the transition to English more difficult, especially post-secondary ed. What is the best way to support those students?
Yeah. Oh,
That's a hard one.
That one hits hard. Yes. I mean, because I've worked with students in these situations, but I mean, especially when we're talking about students coming in at the middle or high school level, and they haven't had those educational opportunities in their home country. I think that, newcomer programs and that type of program is the best situation for those students. And I know that it's hard to necessarily create those in smaller districts, but ideally you have a safe place for students that are coming in, because we don't know what their experience was before they came in. But really trying to identify that. I think a lot of times educators are quick to say that they aren't bringing any educational experiences with them, but I think trying to find a way to assess what they are bringing is critical to that transition to English. Not being able to read is a huge component, and I think that will take time, but every student's bringing something, even if it's an experience, they have something to provide. So really trying to find what that strength is, I think, is first step to making them feel successful in their educational journey.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. That was kind of you to say thank you. And then I have a quick question based on Melissa's point, where in a previous capacity, I had a lot of students that were emerging bilingual, but Spanish was not their native language. In fact, their native language was an indigenous language that maybe 40 or so people on this globe speak. And so curious about how the emergent bilingual work, I know you mentioned that it's primarily focused on folks with native Spanish speakers, but how you all plan to extend that work for folks with different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think we wanted to focus in on where the majority of our population is that we're talking about and serving. But as we move forward, I think it is, you know, we're cradle to career, so we're looking at what's happening in elementary school. As we look into secondary to post-secondary, a lot of times the programs students are in are exactly the same, right? So whether you're a Spanish speaker or any other language, you're in the same type of program, which is usually an ESL program. So I think we'll really be digging into what those programs look like and how are they supporting students. And the support systems should be across the board. So what, you know, it's not, those best practices should go across any language, because if you're using the strategies, the English as a second language strategies, the linguistic supports, that should translate to other areas. So we'll be looking at that, I think, as we move forward too.
Thank you so much. And I think we're just about, I think, oh, Bryn just put a comment in the chat. In Texas, we have more and more Mandarin. As the higher population of language, does this translate? Oh, and then Bryn just said you just answered, correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I know we have a couple of minutes left. This is a nice question to close on before we turn it back over to Gregory, which is what self-care practices can folks prioritize to sustain the energy and commitment to this work to ensure that they can effectively support students in their communities long term?
I mean, I think that is the age-old question for educators, right? And especially this time of year. I mean, I don't know where y'all are at. We have about 9 days left of school over here. But I think this kind of, I would love to pose this to the group too. Like, what do y'all think? And what do you find is helpful for teachers and educators? I think, you know, we all have our own ways of sustaining ourselves, whether it's, you know, taking a step back and trying to find a different role that you might need for a couple years before you go back in, or but I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I'd be curious what others have to say for that. And I see the question around CTE teacher PD. First ask the self-care one, and then I would talk about the CTE PD.
I'll just point folks, NAPE does have a podcast on self-care for educators with former EC member Kimberly Ellis. And at NAPE, we prioritized self-care last year, not this most recent summit, but we had a room for folks to be able to disengage and re-engage with themselves. And so that is what I would say is my favorite self-care practice, is regrounding myself in my current environment and allowing myself to turn off my mind to whatever the things are, because in education, there's always something, and reconnecting with the why of the work, I think is an energy restorer for me personally. And I encourage everyone that can hear this and everyone in this conversation to reflect, even after this call wraps, on how you will care for yourself today and moving forward. It is essential. It is not a question of how, it is a question of like the why, and it's essential. So, and then CTE teacher PD, if you have anything to weigh in on that.
I think that the PD that we'll be launching with NAPE this summer, we're excited. It's called Leading for Emergent Bilingual Success, and it'll be a combination, I believe, and Audrey, chime in if I'm wrong, but I believe it's going to be a combination of the coaching for equity with the lens of emergent bilinguals. So we will have that opportunity for district level leaders and CTE directors to be a part of that conversation. And I hope that what happens for them is what happened for me when I went through the NAPE training, is it just really changes your perspective on the student experience and gives you that empathy and equity lens that's really necessary for pulling that together.
Indeed. I'm going to go ahead and bring Gregory back and to thank you again, Heather, for your wisdom and for your insight. We're so appreciative of you sharing today. And Diana, thank you for weighing in the chat. I agree. I think conversations like this remind us of why we do our work and also connecting with others in similar communities and backgrounds that are facing similar challenges is really energizing. Even if it's just all saying, I don't have the answer. You feel a little bit better about not being the person with the answers. So thank you again, Heather, for your vulnerability and sharing this work at its inception. It's important for folks to see all stages of work. And so thank you for your willingness to share with us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Gregory. And thank you to our wonderful participants.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I really, really appreciate our guest speaker. Thank you so much. Our fireside host, co-host, guest, Heather, thank you so much for the information that you shared, and Brittany for leading us through this conversation, and everybody else who's contributed to it. This is one of the things that I really enjoy about NAPE, is that it's not just about professional development, but it's about the learning, and the learning comes through these connections. And I think it echoes the comment that was shared about how we support each other emotionally, how we, sustain ourselves in this work is through building of community and through this community. And so I just want to share my appreciation for the time that we shared this fiscal year as a community. And I hope that we can continue this journey when we kick off the member series beginning in the upcoming school year this fall. So look out for notices about that. We may be continuing some of these topics. We may be expanding on them, and we may be adding some more. But really where it all comes down to is the feedback that we get from the community, and that includes you. So coming up shortly in the next month or so, NAPE members will be invited to share their thoughts through our member survey that we do. And we'll be presenting it throughout the summer and leading into the next year. And that is what we use as our North Star to guide us around these kinds of conversations that are important to you, as well as the kind of guests that are invited. We rely on the network, which includes you, for the wonderful guests who come in with a lot of great information for us to keep these conversations going. So I just want to remind folks of that, to fill out the member survey, and you'll be seeing that shortly, and stay tuned for other announcements and information. So once again, thank you, and you all have a great summer out there, and keep doing what you do. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.